This is CNN. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining me. I'm Jessica Dean. Frederica Whitfield is off today. Right now, a devastated community is demanding answers, action, and accountability after a gunman entered an elementary school and murdered 19 children and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas. President Biden is calling on citizens to make America safer as he prepares to travel to Uvalde to honor the victims tomorrow. Meantime, heartbroken parents preparing to bury their children in the coming days as new details fuel pressing questions and prompt real concern about the police response to the school massacre. Police officials now working to clear the record, admitting they did not confront the shooter before he entered the school, despite previous claims to the contrary. We also now know that more than an hour passed between the first 911 call and the moment that shooter was killed. CNN's Shimon Prokupecz pushed for straight answers during a press conference on Friday.
You say there were 19 officers gathered in the hallway or somewhere. What efforts were made to try and break through that door? You say it was locked. What efforts were the officers making to try and break through either that door or another door to get inside that classroom?
None at that time. The on-scene commander at the time believed that it had transitioned from an active shooter to a barricaded subject.
Sir, you have people who are alive, children who are calling 911 saying, please send the police. They are alive in that classroom. There are lives that are at risk.
Hey,
that's not protocol, is it?
We're well aware of that.
Right, yeah. But why was this decision made not to go in and rescue these children?
Again, you know, the on-scene commander considered it a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, you know, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation and not a barricaded subject.
The incident commander has been identified as Uvalde School District Police Chief Pedro Pete Arredondo. Arredondo made 2 brief statements to the press on the day of the shooting, but has not spoken publicly since. A top official says Arredondo made the wrong call.
For the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that.
When President Biden travels to Uvalde tomorrow, he's going to meet with victims' families and other community members there. CNN's Adrian Broadus joins us now live from Uvalde. Adrian, how is the president expected to spend the day tomorrow?
Good afternoon to you. President Biden is expected to meet with the families who are represented by the crosses on the lawn of the school behind me. He will meet with those families and hear from them. And when the president tells those families that he understands what they are going through, he means it. This is personal for President Biden. He too has had to bury his own child. He will also meet with leaders throughout the community. As you know, this is a community facing scrutiny because with each news conference, the story altered. And here in this town, not only members of the community, but parents and families are upset. Let me tell you a little about the town. It's a close-knit community, and I know we hear that cliche repeated over and over, but this is a town where everyone knows everyone. Members of law enforcement are linked to children who also go to the school. One of the 2 teachers posted on her bio on the school's website that she was married to a member of law enforcement. So this is a community that is hurting, especially after hearing that 911 timeline. I want to go over that timeline that was revealed to us yesterday. And there was a warning from the director of the Department of Public Safety when he laid out that timeline, saying it was better for him to read it than allow us, the media, to hear it. The first call came around 11:30. It was from a panicked teacher. Soon after, at 12:03, a caller inside of the school who said she was in room 112 called, whispering, asking for help. She followed up multiple times over the next hour, calling the 911 dispatcher. At one point, she said at least 8 to 9 people are still alive. And this is key, it's critical. This child was letting the dispatcher know that there was still hope. And then later another caller called, and when that caller called, it could be heard over the 911 line, gunshots had been fired. And then when that first child called again, she said, please send help now. And it took at least an hour and 20 minutes passed from the time of the initial call before that 18-year-old shooter was killed. And this is raising a lot of questions. People were already hurting as these families prepare to bury their children, but now they're asking, what took so long? Why didn't the members of law enforcement who were in the hall or wherever they were go inside to stop the threat?
Oh, Adrienne Broadus taking us through that devastating timeline. Thank you so much for your reporting there in Uvalde. And joining me now to discuss this is Juliette Kayyem. She's a CNN national security analyst, and she also served as an assistant secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. Juliette, great to see you. Thanks for making time. We just listened to Adrienne, and I know that timeline, we started hearing all of these details yesterday, and it is still, so many people are just shaking their heads. And we know that officials in Uvalde have acknowledged that the commander made the wrong decision. You've called this an abject failure. What happened here? Does this just come back to training?
No, because the training is actually the opposite. This is the weird thing about it. If the training had said, well, stand by and weigh all the factors and see who's alive and who's dead, then you would just say he made a bad judgment call, right? I mean, in other words, he just calculated the risk. The training that they received, and we know this now, they've received active shooter training over the last couple of years. I think the most recent was just several months ago. The active shooter training is absolutely clear. No ifs, ands, or buts. You will have an active shooter. That shooter is denied any privileges of understanding him, of trying to figure out what he wants, of hostage taking, anything. You go in and you eliminate the threat. We know this now. And so that's the beyond horrifying, but the frustrating thing about this is that it's the training was there. It's just it's the capacity and the will, and I think and ability and competency, and did he freeze? Did he, what was he thinking is going to be the hardest thing to ever answer, even if we now have some explanation of why they were sitting outside. I will say one thing. For the other men to stand there for an hour, there's going to be a big question about whether they should have just ignored those orders. They're closer, they're by the door, they're hearing what's going on, and sometimes you have a duty to disobey. And I just keep thinking about, why didn't anyone, knowing, seeing, hearing what was going on in that room, just disobey the orders?
Right. And I do think that's been something that's come up when I've been talking with people about it, and we've been discussing it here on the air, a duty to disobey, that obviously law enforcement works with a chain of command. But at that point, again, as someone who has not worked in law enforcement, it would seem to me you can go ahead and sort through that later.
Right. I've talked to a bunch of former colleagues. I mean, we're all sort of like, we don't get it because this is, as I've been saying the last couple of days, this is so easy. I hate to say easy, but I mean, this is a calculation that you actually don't need much thought about. We know active shooter, eliminate the threat, period. There's nothing else you actually need to think about, because all the other problems will cure themselves, so to speak, once you eliminate the threat. So why weren't others? And this is, I think, the big question, you have a duty to disobey if you're just sitting there and something is wrong. And, one of the challenges of chain of command is that there's an obedience factor to it, because that's actually how it works. But a number of people I've talked to have been in those situations, which I haven't, right? That been in those situations would say, you would just know, your judgment would tell you. And I have to say, this is common in disaster management or crisis management. You do anticipate a certain amount of pivoting and fluidity, because the people closest are going to have better judgment calls. So almost every disaster response will have an element of sort of disobedience, so to speak. And I just can't, it's sort of unfathomable to me. And I think the story we don't quite know yet, this story will change. I'm quite confident of it, just given how the information has come out, is in fact the moment of entry and the shooting. Is that clearly was some form of disobedience, and whoever's going in and shooting him as he should have been shot an hour before, clearly just decided that the chain had to be broken.
Mm-hmm. And a father of one of the children who did die in the shooting has said someone should be held accountable for this time that it took officers. How does an investigation proceed forward? How does that work?
Well, I think right now, so normally you would have an after action report or a lessons learned report, but I've never experienced, really sort of epic Katrina-like mistakes are going on here. So you would want an independent entity to come in. The locals don't have the capacity, as we now know, the expertise, and they're also, as we now know, were protecting themselves in the narrative. I think the state, as I've been saying the last couple of weeks, especially with the governor sort of clear and sort of, he got out so in front of the facts. I don't even think the state has the capacity to do this. You can imagine a separate entity, maybe another part of the state apparatus could do it, or a federal entity, the FBI. But you'd want an independent review. So there will be, look, we know it now, there's going to be lawsuits. This wasn't a bad call. It was negligence of tragic proportions and dereliction of duty, so to speak. I mean, we train law enforcement, and it's a quid pro quo, right? I mean, you in other words, you can't get the guns and act a certain way and be a certain way, and then when kids, armed with crowns and paper need you to rush in, you're not willing to do it. So that's what we would, ideally you would want that kind of independent review to go in. And you can even imagine, I'm throwing this out here if anyone will listen, but the International Association of Chiefs of Police or the Domestic Organization of Chiefs of Police, you'll get a separate entity in there that's not political, that can answer questions, focus, blame where it needs to, but also make us realize that you can arm 19 men, and if they don't act, it's gonna, children will still die, so that the root causes of why this is happening are not being addressed, which we know what it is. It's guns.
Right. And before I let you go, just quickly to follow up on that, do you think that there will be charges, or could there be charges filed against any, like the commanding officer in this incident?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they are somewhat protected in some ways. So there's going to be a gross negligence standard, which is sometimes hard to achieve. But most of these cases settle with have some sort of civil lawsuit that eventually gets settled. We've seen that in many of these school cases. I've never seen, as most of our experts are saying, we've never quite seen anything like this because of the horror of just imagining that hour when, again, the training is clear. So this wasn't that the training was bad and the person didn't act well. The training was clear, and he violated or did not implement the training that everyone has known to do for the last 20 years. It's eliminate the threat. It's like you don't even think about it. You're just eliminating the threat.
Juliette Kayyem, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks.
And the end of the school year is supposed to be a time of celebration, of course. But in Uvalde, 21 families now preparing for funerals. Boris Sanchez tells us what we've learned about some of the victims.
3 days after 21 innocent lives were taken, we're learning more about the loved ones this small town is grieving.
Don't forget them, please. Do something about it, I beg you.
Miranda Mathis was 11 years old. A friend of her mother's told the Washington Post Miranda was a fun, spunky, bright little girl. 10-year-old Rogelio Torres, his aunt telling CNN affiliate KSAT he was a, quote, very intelligent, hardworking, and helpful person. He'll be missed and never forgotten. Maite Rodriguez, also 10 years old. Her mother Anna says Maite dreamed of becoming a marine biologist and wanted to attend college at Texas A&M. In a touching Facebook tribute, Anna calls her daughter, quote, sweet, charismatic, loving, caring, loyal, free, ambitious, funny, silly, goal-driven, and her best friend. Other victims' names have also been confirmed. Layla Salazar, 11 years old, McKenna Lee Elrod, Alethea Ramirez, and Jace Carmelo Luevanos, all just 10 years old. And in a tragic twist, the husband of Irma Garcia, one of the murdered teachers, has also died. According to the Archdiocese of San Antonio, Joe Garcia suffered a heart attack after news of his wife's death and passed away on Thursday. The couple had been married more than 24 years and were high school sweethearts.
They came to Mass every Sunday.
Father Eduardo Morales of Sacred Heart Church in Uvalde knew the family well and greeted Irma as she walked into service on Sunday morning. He says the couple were a fixture in the community and leave behind 4 children who he privately consoled shortly after Joe's death.
I've told the community that in my own family, when we've had a death, that it's the church and prayer that has gotten us through all this. Not that it takes the pain away.
The Garcias among a list of names, of lives cut too short. Eva Mireles, Amiri Garza, Uzziah Garcia, Javier Lopez, Jose Flores Jr., Lexi Rubio, Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, Jacqueline Casares, Tess Mata, Nevea Bravo, Ellie Garcia, Jayla Silguero, Elijah Torres, names that will forever be etched in the memories of those touched and affected by this horrible tragedy.
Jose Flores, show him to the state, the nation, show him to the world. I want everybody to know him. When he died, I died hard with him.
Boris Sanchez, thank you for that. We're going to have much more from Uvalde, Texas ahead as we continue to learn new details about the 21 innocent lives lost in that massacre, 19 children and 2 teachers. Much more straight ahead.
In our world, every day is a beautiful one.
To fly, to fly, to fly.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
All new African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. Highlighting some of the biggest changemakers on the continent.
Hands up! This place right here is where talent is nurtured. We're trying to bring positive change into the community.
African Voices Changemakers, only on CNN, in association with Glow.
Have you heard it like this?
Let's untangle the players and political forces.
Fast-paced news from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Weeknights on CNN.
Nothing is ever given to you in life. If you want to be a great businessman, you got to put in the work. And the same applies to survivors of trafficking. My name is Given Kachepa, and I'm now a dentist in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Zambia. We grew up very poor. I was trafficked into the United States by an organization known as TTT Partners in Education. The mission of the organization was to go to African countries and bring kids to America to sing in churches. We were singing in malls. We were singing in schools. So the ministry had different ways of making revenue, and yet those of us that were singing were not receiving a penny from that. My dental practice is based here in North Dallas. We've been here now 5 years. It's been an exciting, wonderful journey. My goal as a dentist in the future is opening up clinics in Zambia. We have 2 of them that we've built from the ground up. And being a business person today, I just cannot foresee a situation in which I would work somebody without compensating them for the work that they're doing. It's important to me that we all try to get along and make life a little bit easier for each other.
She grows bigger and bigger, right?
A mother
Happy birthday, honey.
caught in a war.
We should not forget, we should not forgive.
Her story,
We have these new threats from Russia is because they're very angry. We are angry too.
and one anchor's journey to meet her.
So nice to meet you.
Has it helped making videos?
Maybe I will die, but this video will be left behind.
An Anderson Cooper 360 special report, A Mother's Diary of War, Monday.
Millions of Americans are starting their summer this weekend with a getaway or maybe a big family get-together. But the CDC wants to remind people COVID has not gone away. Right now, more than 55% of Americans are in a location with a medium or high COVID community level. Let's bring in Dr. Megan Ranney to talk about this. She's an emergency physician and academic dean of public health at Brown University. Great to see you, doctor. Thanks for being here. Walk us through how we can stay safe in this current uptick. The good news is we know a lot of the things that we can do now.
Right. It is the same things that we have been doing throughout this pandemic, right? The first thing is get vaccinated if you haven't, get your first booster if you haven't, and if you're in that older age group, age 50 plus, get your second booster. That is the very best thing that you can do to prevent severe disease, hospitalization, and long COVID. The second thing is if you don't want to catch COVID, wear a high quality mask when you are indoors with large groups of people. Here at my own university at Brown, we're currently celebrating commencement. We put a mask mandate back in place for this weekend. Students haven't been on campus for a couple of weeks, but with so many people being here, we don't want any of our indoor events just turn into super spreaders. And so that's the caution that I give to Americans. If you're doing these indoor events and not wearing a mask, you have to expect that you are most likely going to come down with COVID. Those vaccines will prevent you from the worst part of it, though.
Right. That's right. That's right. And I want to turn to the conversation now to Uvalde and the mass shooting there this week. You were the focus of an article in The Atlantic that looked at a new model for handling gun violence. And for starters, let's just kick it off here. Do you see gun violence as a public health crisis?
This is the definition of a public health crisis. We have seen firearm injuries increasing inexorably across the United States for about a decade now, and we've had a significant increase over the past 2 years. Gun homicides, gun suicides, and sadly, now that schools are reopened, school shootings as well are all going up. We need to take a different approach to stopping it. What we have been doing for the last 10, 15 years clearly is not working and is even making it worse. So applying those standard public health tools that we have used time and time again to prevent injury, prevent illness before it happens is really the best and only path forward for us right now. We can keep having the same arguments and we're going to keep seeing gun deaths rise. And I will tell you, as a mom and as an ER doc, I'm not willing to stand for that.
And in that article, you say, quote, core to public health is the idea that you have to think on a larger scale, not just about the patient in front of you, but also the individual and population level risk factors. If gun violence is treated as or labeled as a public health crisis, how do you believe that would change things?
So once we label it as a public health crisis, we of course have to keep talking about the gun. Someone who's impulsive or filled with hate or filled with sadness and picks up a gun has a higher chance of killing themselves or killing someone else. But it's also about going backwards, about thinking about what got to that person to that point where they were ready to misuse a gun, and how do we change the trajectory? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples because that can seem really abstract. Boys and girls clubs have been shown to decrease the level of gun violence in their communities. Putting in gardens in vacant lots has been shown to decrease the amount of gun violence in communities. And having simple discussions about recognizing if you have an elderly parent or a loved one who's showing signs of depression or dementia, and reminding you to lock up that gun safely, that can decrease rates of gun suicide. So there are a lot of interventions that we can do way before we get to this horrible moment where we're trying to get police to run into a school and stop it, that can help change the trajectory and bend the curve, the horrible curve that we are on.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you talk about really meeting this really early, right? Like making sure that children have a place to go, that they feel seen, that they're, they have a community around them, and that can make a big difference along with all of the other things that are being discussed right now.
That's right. There are folks who are so focused on the mental health crisis of children in our country right now, and then want to blame that for the rise in gun violence. They are two separate things, but if we want to treat mental health, if we want to talk about a link between mental health and guns, let's provide resources to treat people's loneliness, anxiety, depression, both long before anything bad happens, and to help all of us heal in the wake of these repeated tragedies. It really is about going upstream in the same way that we do to prevent heart attacks or to prevent car crash deaths, using those same tried and true techniques for this very real health problem.
All right, Dr. Megan Ranney, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still to come this hour, both President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris traveling to opposite corners of the country this weekend as they honor and mourn the victims of the latest mass shootings in America. We'll have their plans in Buffalo and Uvalde. That's next.
I'm Melissa Bell in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action. daily news updates in your inbox. Sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus, fact versus fiction.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
I'm Vedika Sood in New Delhi, and this is CNN.
A former prosecutor and foreign policy novice, South Korea's new president, Yoon Suk-yeol, has had a busy first couple of weeks on the job. Hosting US President Joe Biden for a summit and three-day visit. Dealing with the threat of North Korea, which launched a number of ballistic missiles this year, some just days after our interview. What would your message to Kim Jong-un be? And signing up for an American pact that China, South Korea's main trading partner, does not like. Coming up on this special edition of Talk Asia, President Yoon Suk-yeol speaks exclusively to CNN in his first interview since taking office. So President Yoon, thank you so much for speaking with us. Now, while President Biden was here, there were concerns North Korea could launch a long-range ballistic missile. I mean, now he's in Japan, there is still that concern from intelligence agencies. But what happens if North Korea carries out its seventh underground nuclear test?
We will strengthen the response to threats and provocations. Both the US and South Korea are planning a stronger response that can stop such provocation.
You've said with President Biden that you're considering expanding the combined military exercises. I mean, we know from experience that that annoys Pyongyang, and there's likely to be some kind of response from them. How do you prevent your 5 years in power from being a cycle of tests, condemnation, and then all the while North Korea is improving its weapons capabilities?
Whether it is a domestic or international issue, setting a principle and making predictable decision is how it should be. With respect to North Korea, the US-South Korean alliance should conduct regular military training. That is the basic duty of every military around the world to maintain their readiness. And of course, that's true for the US-Korea combined forces. We need to conduct a necessary level of combined training to be able to respond to military and national security threats on the Korean Peninsula.
But in Kim Jong-un, you have a leader who's given a 5-year plan of what he wants to achieve militarily. He seems to have no interest in talking whatsoever. How do you convince him to talk?
I think the ball is in Chairman Kim's court. It is his choice to start a dialogue with us. I do not want North Korea to collapse. My hope is for North Korea to prosper alongside South Korea. I don't believe that enhancing its nuclear capability is helpful and conducive to maintaining international peace and shared prosperity.
Do you think Kim Jong-un ever would give up his nuclear weapons?
글쎄 그건 제가 알 수 없죠.
Well, that's not something I can know. But it's questionable, in the long term, how much longer this situation can be maintained.
유지할 수 있을지 의문입니다.
Things have moved on since 2017 when North Korea ramped up testing of its ballistic missile and nuclear program, causing concern for South Korea and its allies. But this year's missile tests have shown that the relative calm of the previous 2 years cannot be taken for granted.
But then obviously what we are all waiting for at this point is potentially another ICBM test or another nuclear test. What's the danger of just sliding back 5 years to 2017 when tensions were high on the Korean Peninsula?
돌아가는 것이 아니고 보편적인 국제
We're not going back 5 years. I believe our domestic and foreign policy must operate based on universal international norms and values.
이게 어떤 일시적인
Just to temporarily escape North Korean provocation or conflict is not something that we should do.
많은 사람들은 그거를 뭐 불종 외교라고도 표현을 하지만
Many call it servile diplomacy, but the policy of being over-concerned about the other side's feelings does not work and has proven to be a failure in the past 5 years.
효과가 없고 실패했다고 하는 것이 지난 5년 동안에 이미 증명이 됐습니다.
One thing I did want to ask was about COVID in North Korea. Now, you've offered to help with vaccines and masks, testing kits. President Biden has also offered to help North Korea. But, I mean, from Kim Jong-un's point of view, it would be very difficult for him to publicly accept aid from the US and from South Korea. How can you ensure aid gets to the North Korean people who really need it without it being rejected by the leader?
북한이 어떤 방식이든지 이걸 수용을 해서
If North Korea accepts these medical supplies to quickly distribute them to its people, we will provide them in any method North Korea wishes. It could be through a third country or an international organization. We are fully prepared.
Coming up, on President Joe Biden's first official trip to Asia, his message to Kim Jong-un was short and sweet. See what South Korea's new president has to say to his neighbour to the north.
What would your message to Kim Jong-un be?
It really only takes a few moments to gain an appreciation of just how tough it is out here.
They've been coming across sniper fire, gunfire, mortar rounds. You can see really just how intense it is here.
We have to wrap it up right now. Quite anxious about spending too much time on scene.
Those are the kids really struggling to get away.
They feel like they won't be able to outrun the war.
They thought the whole border was open.
People are just trying to bust through towards what they think is going to be a better life.
These nurses, these doctors really have nerves of steel.
You can't help but be struck by how interconnected our world is.
Arwa Damon, CNN.
President Yoon Suk-yeol won South Korea's closest election in history, a conservative leader in his very first job in politics.
기호 2번 윤석열.
He campaigned to strengthen the alliance between his country and the United States, a plan he is now putting into action. He proudly shows off his first gift from President Biden, a plaque bearing a famous quote from late US President Harry Truman, one Yoon says he tries to live by. The buck stops here.
For a long time during my public career, I have been trying to work with a mindset like this. I don't know how he knew I liked it.
이 글귀를 되게 좋아한다는 거를.
President Biden puts a lot of weight on personal relationships with leaders. You had 4 separate meetings with him. How is your dynamic with President Biden?
바이든 대통령과
We had a long conversation and mainly we spoke of the universal norms and values.
바이든 대통령도
President Biden is a politician, but he was a lawyer, and so am I. We spent much time speaking about the commonalities in the constitution of our two countries and their shared values.
거의 차이가 없이
During that time, we mutually affirmed that they almost perfectly align.
일치한다고 하는 것을 서로가 확인하는 그런 시간이었습니다.
Now, you agreed with President Biden that US strategic assets could be deployed to South Korea in a timely and coordinated manner if necessary. What military assets would you want to see on the peninsula? I mean, what does a strong deterrence look like for you?
어떤 공격을 받았거나 또는 공격에 준하는 어떤 위협이 있을 때
In case of a direct military invasion or in case of imminent threat equal to an attack, it would involve advanced conventional arms including fighter jets, missiles, and nuclear weapons.
무기들이 전부 포함된다고 볼 수 있습니다.
Would you allow US tactical nuclear weapons on the peninsula?
아직 우리 대한민국
Deploying tactical nuclear weapons on Korean soil was not yet discussed.
Now, President Biden, while he was here, was asked for his message to Kim Jong-un. His message was, hello, period. What would your message to Kim Jong-un be?
특별히 메시지를 남긴다고
I don't know how Chairman Kim would perceive it if I leave a particular message.
저는 북한이든 어떠한 국가든
But whether it's North Korea or any other country in the international community, they should join the universal values and norms for peace and common prosperity.
Now, President Biden has said how important it is for Seoul and Tokyo to have good economic and military cooperation. It also clearly helps the United States. But many governments before yours have tried and not managed to resolve these historical issues. How can you do this differently?
한일과의 관계는
We must quickly restore our relations to the period when we shared the best relations since the diplomatic normalization of 1965.
지금부터 한 5, 60년 전에
The time of normalization, which was 50 to 60 years ago, was not long after we escaped Japan's occupation. And in a way, the anti-Japanese sentiment among our people was stronger than it is now.
그러나 그때에도 서로에게 그 미래를 위해서
But even then, we normalized diplomatic relations for each other's future and have been developing relations since. 50 to 60 years have passed since then. It's important for the two countries to think of each other's future.
물론 역사 문제라고 하는
Of course, the historical issue is an issue of national identity and the education of the coming generation. But that cannot come before the present and future of our country. When the two countries develop each other's future, it is my belief that the issue of past history can be well resolved too.
과거의 그 역사 문제도 양국 간에 잘 해결될 수 있을 것이라는 믿음을 저는 가지고 있습니다.
Up next, relations between the US and China may be strained, but what does South Korea's new president have to say to its largest trading partner?
Are you anticipating a new kind of relationship with China?
are the leading companies going to be talking about in the next 2 to 3 years from a talent perspective? It will be about skills. It will be about the use of AI to help their people develop their skills and to transform organizations. We know that skills are becoming obsolete very fast because of the change in digital and the use of technology. And it also enables you to open up the talent pipeline. So for example, in the US, we will hire 20% of our entry-level hiring this year will be into our apprenticeship program. Our apprenticeship program does not focus on 4-year degrees. It focuses on skills and potential. We also have a database of all of the skills of our client-facing people, and we can use algorithms to identify who can be upskilled into new hot areas.
All new Inside Africa. Go inside the inventive minds, evolving places, and creative trends of the Africa you need to know now. A film academy designed to help young African creatives thrive.
There's a kind of free flow and a spirit out there that I think is very, very exciting.
Inside Africa on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumness, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
US President Joe Biden was in Asia this week to reconnect with allies and launch an economic group with 13 nations, South Korea included.
Thank you all for joining today.
The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is widely seen as an economic counter to China. Beijing has already made its anger known on that, and also the group known as the Quad, or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, an informal working group made up of the US, Australia, India and Japan, which South Korea is considering joining. So this brings me to President Biden's Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which you have shown interest in being part of. You've also shown interest in being part of the Quad, if invited. Why do you feel it's important for South Korea to be part of these groups?
먼저 인도 태평양 프레임워크라고 하는 것은
First of all, the Indo-Pacific Framework doesn't have a set content like the FTA.
그런데 이거는 인도 태평양 지역의
However, it is in the process of forming the norms and rules for economy and trade in the Indo-Pacific region. If we don't actively participate in the process of making these rules for economic exchanges and trade with the countries within the Indo-Pacific region, it would be a great loss to our national interest. So I think it's only natural that we participate in this.
그리고 쿼드 문제는
And with respect to Quad, we are now thinking of joining the working groups, such as in areas of vaccine, climate change, and emerging technology.
쿼드 참여 문제에 대해
However, becoming an official member, this is something we and the members of the Quad are still cautious about.
그런 상태라고 보시면 될 것 같습니다.
IPEF, for example, I mean, it's widely seen as an economic counter to China. We've had a comment from the Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, saying he believes the Asian countries involved are like pawns for the US hegemony. I mean, how do you avoid a backlash from China, your biggest trading partner?
China is now one of the 2 largest economies and also one of the world leaders. They should also abide by the rule-based international order based on universal values, not only participating in it, but also leading the order.
참여하고 그것을 리드해 나가야 된다고 저는 생각을 합니다.
But being part of these groups, you could face some economic backlash, some economic retaliation from China. I mean, for example, when the THAAD missile system was brought into South Korea, that led to an economic boycott, which was very painful to many businesses here. How do you avoid that happening again, or are you not concerned by that?
미중이 지금 전략 경쟁 관계에 있다고들 얘기를
Many people say they are now in strategic competition, but they're each other's largest trade partners. So even if they're in political competition, their economic and trading cooperation is bound to continue.
중국의 이런 보복 조치가
One can hypothesize Chinese retaliation, but whether it would be helpful for China's national interest is questionable. There are many things that Korea and China need from each other, so such a decision would not help.
우리가 안보나 기술 문제에 있어서
Even if we strengthen our alliances with the United States in security and technology, it does not mean that we think our economic cooperation with China is unimportant. So I do not believe it is reasonable for China to be overly sensitive about this matter.
Now, in your joint statement with President Biden over the weekend, you also mentioned the importance of maintaining peace and stability in the South China Sea, in Taiwan Strait. I mean, these are very public points that previous South Korean presidents have not made. Are you anticipating a new kind of relationship with China?
이전 정부도 말을 안 했을 뿐이지.
The previous administration has not been vocal about it. But the value of open sea lanes based on international law, or the rights to free passage in the sea, where many interests depend, including the energy supply lines of our neighboring countries, has all been acknowledged. Everyone de facto accepts it.
이전 정부에서는 이 대만 문제가
Because during the previous administration, the Taiwan issue didn't come to the fore, so maybe it wasn't necessary to make that clear. But Taiwan is under a lot of focus right now as an international issue. And in this sense, I think that declaring the universal principles of international law is something that contributes to the peace and prosperity of the region.
Up next, from international tensions to domestic strife, how South Korea's new president angered feminists during his campaign and what he plans to do about it.
South Korea is at or near the bottom in many surveys across the board when it comes to gender equality. How are you going to address this issue?
I've personally met people around the world who told me that the first way that they found out about sex trafficking was through our documentary Nefarious. And for many people, that was the turning point that they chose to commit their life to fight this issue. My name is Helen Taylor, and I am the Vice President of Impact at the anti-human trafficking organization Exodus Cry. We are currently headquartered in Southern California. Exodus Cry began back in 2008. Our founder, Benjamin Nolo, found out about the issue of trafficking and how it was a global human rights crisis. With a background in filmmaking, he went overseas to 19 different nations and interviewed survivors, spoke with global activists and politicians. And from that series of trips, he created a documentary called Nefarious Merchant of Souls. It's been used by hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations and communities to raise awareness. It's been shown on military bases, in churches, before the UN, in the US White House, parliaments around the world. So it really is such a testament to the power of a documentary and a story that you're able to spotlight an incredibly important and urgent global issue in a way that many people beyond your immediate reach are able to hear about.
What's it like to be Barry Manilow?
He writes the songs that make the whole world sing.
Oh, look, a piano.
Oh, imagine that.
Fans love him.
You're one of my idols.
Critics, not always.
It wasn't just one critic, it was all of them.
Join me as I ask Barry Manilow about being famous.
There were a couple of years there that I was a brat.
Being inspired.
My proudest moment as a songwriter.
And being an icon for decades.
Being Barry Manilow, Tuesday on CNN.
President Yoon Suk-yeol won South Korea's recent election with a campaign taking a tougher stance on corruption and inequality, but he was not embraced by everyone. Women's rights groups accused him of appealing to anti-feminist voters, by promising a series of measures threatening to undermine small gains to gender equality made in recent years. In a country where many women feel discriminated against, I asked this Conservative president how he will bring all parts of the country on board.
One question about gender equality, which was a very prominent topic during the election here. And during the campaign, you did say that you were considering abolishing the Ministry of Gender Equality.